Good evening and welcome again to my channel, Jayla Bamba. This is Jamila. Um, we're going to talk about the sixth chapter of Drug, the Science and Culture Behind Psychotropic Drugs. It is a chapter that's about uh, entertainment. Not really, but it's about the stress that comes in times of war, about entertainments when we need it in those times and in other times, about the stresses that affect people working in the entertainment, and about the science that comes to the rescue to help and the research and the labs and the experiment and the medications that come with the disorders and diagnoses that spring from all of these new ones. So, uh, Divertimento, that's the title of the chapter, and I looked up Divertimento. I'm not really savvy in the field of classical music or music, studied music, but I love listening to it. I looked up Divertimento. It is actually not classical music. It is a music genre that departed from the very rigid academic, canonized, confirmed confines of classical music. Wikipedia describes it as having a light-hearted mood. Julio Alcazar also wrote a novel that he called Divertimento. He's a novelist. The title of this chapter will reflect on why the author chose it. This title, as usual, the author opens the chapter with a quote. This time it says, "Profits substantial will always be made by Switzerland engaged in the making of drug trade." And it's an anonymous quote. I said, why didn't he just wrote it? He didn't need to say that. It's just probably just to tell us that the pharmaceutical business will always be winning. You know, taking jumping to chances and opportunities and making money out of it. It is World War II. Nazis conquered Europe except for Switzerland. Swiss Nazis and fascists failed to launch. News of German Operation Tannenbaum for invading Switzerland and Liechtenstein were clouding the Swiss scenery. Opera houses were still open, as we have known from the title, and the Basel Chamber Orchestra had on its playlist that night of June 11, 1940, Divertimento by the Hungarian Bela Bartok, an anti-fascist, and other pieces of equally unpopular composers among Nazis and fascists. The conductor was Doctor Paul Sakar, the founder of the orchestra. He had commissioned Bartok to write the music for strings, percussion, and celesta, a divertimento. For the concert, Bartok wrote Divertimento, based on a request from Sakar, who wanted a light-hearted piece to lift off the aura war doom. Paul Sakar was born to a farmer's daughter and a gardener's. That is to say, he was not from a rich background, but he got married into one. And as you will follow with me, and I hope there is somebody who's gonna comment, there is lots of historic and by talking about people's lives and all that. But that the title of the book is the culture and science behind psychotropic drugs. They go all together. In this book, we from the beginning, like the early beginnings of humankind to nowadays, it's all connected. New disorders, new medications, to look for the medications, how they search, etc., and how they work. For the concert, Bartok wrote Divertimento, as I said, and Paul Saka was poor, and but he got married into a rich one. In 1934, he married Emanuel Hoffmann's widow and heiress of his Hoffmann and LaRoche company. He joined the company's board directors and together with other directors took some of the major decisions back then. They did not terminate or lay off their Jewish workers when most around them have become ionized. More the companies that were working back then and employees were mostly of Aryan or descent, not other races, and got rid of the others, mainly the Jews. The company has become one of the richest and largest based on that decision because they did not lay off their employees in 1970s. No, the company has become one of the richest by the 1970s. It also played a major role in revolutionizing the field of pharmacology by introducing psychotropics. And that's the Hoffman and LaRoche company. Now, how this happened, let's start from how Mr. Hoffman met Mrs. LaRoche, and that's a section that the author dedicated to and titled Mr. Hoffman Meets Miss LaRoche. Basel is the dynamo of the pharmaceutical business. We have seen that from chapter 1. Prior to that, it was known for its silk ribbon business. That business eclipsed for the dye stuff with the coming of the railroad, the booming of the Industrial Revolution, and the rising population. As has been presented in previous chapters, the dye stuff business gave rise to the pharmaceutical business in Europe. New therapeutic pharmacology, antibiotics, psychotropics emerged, and people's perception of disease and treatment changed. Ads and packaging also helped boost the people's hope to conquer disease and enriched big pharma, of course. Uh, Fritz Hoffmann, the member of the Ribbon Silk Company, the oldest business in Basel, and Max Karl Traub, a pharmacist from Munich, started Hoffmann, Traub and Company in 1894. And this was pharmaceutical. They departed from their line of business, and Fritz Hoffmann joined hands with Max Karl Traub, and they built a startup business back then that was called Hoffmann Traub and Company. They parted ways later. The company became Hoffmann La Roche, or Roche, after Fritz married Adele La Roche. The company had known a few setbacks before it gained respectful status and opened a few branches in major areas of the world. It owed its success and survival to Fritz Hoffmann's tact in business and skill, who also surrounded himself with very shrewd businessmen. His son Emmanuel joined the company in 1921. He married the daughter of Fritz Stalin, a famous architect, and Maya Stalin. He died in a car accident. Maya, his widow, was a sculptor, and she was a sculptor. She crisscrossed paths with Paul Sacker, who was a music conductor, a classical music conductor. So they got married in 1931. The new world becomes, that's the next chapter. Although Switzerland was not self-declared anti-Semitic. It was affected with what was going on in its vicinity. The dilemma was what to do with those flocks of Jewish refugees, how many to allow in, and whether to employ them, and how should employers treat them. Some companies got fully or partially alienized and lost their Jewish employees. Hoffman Labush kept theirs, as we have introduced before. In 1941, Roche Board transferred their headquarters to Norley, New Jersey, USA, and moved their Jewish employees to the new location. Among those employees was the Jewish chemist who invented Valium, Leo Sternberg. Now we're going to see the education of Leo Sternberg. The education of Leo. Leo Sternberg, born in Croatia in 1908 to Jewish parents. His father, a Jewish Polish, opened a pharmacy there where Junior was allowed to help with mixtures. He enrolled to study pharmacy in Poland in 1926. His PhD thesis research revolved on the synthesis of dye-stuff intermediates. His thesis was about the synthesis of dye-stuff and dye-stuff intermediates. He was granted the fellowship to Vienna. He moved to Zurich, driven by the anti-Semitism. He joined Roche after his fellowship, then was moved to USA among Jewish Roche employees. 1949, he synthesized a new analog for biotin that got patented by Roche. And then later, we're going to see how he invented the Valium. Now, see how this has been going on, the war, the people, moving here and there, and then now we come to the anxious moment, and that's why they needed some entertainment. So the anxious moment is a section that the author has in this chapter, and it talks about how in the 1950s birthed pharmacology. It revolutionized the way mental health was perceived and treated. Antipsychotics allowed to patients outpatient treatment. Psychotic people with psychosis, schizophrenia, were no more just held hostage or imprisoned kind of in hospitals, but they could be now treated while they're in their families, among their families, and just take their antipsychotic medications and keep the disorder under control. Antidepressants led to the establishment of clinical depression. Depression has been acknowledged as a disorder, mental disorder. Psychopharmacology became a magnet for drug research and investments. Now, this booming of the psychotropic psychopharmacology had many other pharmaceutical companies or startup pharmaceutical companies or companies that shifted their own business to the pharmaceutical business to start investing in this line of treatment. A business that needed a target clientele. The blooming psychopharmacology resulted in the establishment of new mental health disorders and diagnoses such as attention deficit disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and many other modern disorders. World War I and World War II filled the world with awe and apprehension. Of course, it has all affected the culture. And Newtonism or Newton determinism, I just wanted to use Newtonism instead of saying Newton determinism, has been replaced by Einstein's relativity. theory or relativism. Nothing is certain now. Uncertainty replaces certitude. The author believes people's sentiment in this era was best captured, according to the author, in the Dadaist manifesto that rejects it all. No more, no more, no more, nothing, nothing, nothing of anything. It's just annihilation of all. Anxiety as diagnosis can be tracked back or traced back to the 19th century, known as nervous exhaustion or neurasthenia. Initially known among middle class people and those who could afford to go to psychotherapy. Anxiety is different from other very dysfunctional disorders that turn person completely dysfunctional or cut off connection to reality. And before that, it wasn't even acknowledged as a disorder, but now they see it as a disorder, but only to people who can afford it and go and afford psychotherapy, such as with the psychologists such as Freud and colleagues, and classified it as a symptom related to neurosis, people with symptoms who do not require commitment or close monitoring. Treatment of anxiety developed as a treatment for epilepsy, as treatment for epilepsy and insomnia were being developed at the same time, where they were looking for treatments um, for these medications. They found that some of these medications calmed the patients, so they used this treatment on patients with anxiety disorders also. Potassium bromide was used to treat epilepsy in the 19th century. Then it was used for various nervous disorders. Nervous disorder, that means that could include, that includes actually anxiety. Chlorhydrate was developed by Justin van Liebig in 1931. It was the real sedative hypnotic. Drugs that were known sedatives include anxiolytics, sedatives, hypnotics, anesthetics, and anticonvulsants, and all these with the potential to be used for treating a variety of disorders, such as meprobamate, barbiturate, and benzodiazepine, all share a molecular action mechanism, yet each has its own particular utility. Now, let's talk about Barber's breakthrough. 1903, Emil Fischer, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, and Joseph von Mering introduced their findings on diethyl barbituric acid, world-known barbiturate or barbitol in USA, um, and barbitone in UK. Johann Adolf von Baer, Nobel Prize laureate, and Fischer's teacher synthesized malonyl urea compound in 1863. It was the yield of malonic acid and urea reaction. The achievement coincided with Saint Barbara's feast, hence the neologized term or name Barbit. That's why he says Barbara's breakthrough. breakthrough. So Barbit in reference to Barbara, Saint Barbara, and then urea acid. So barbituric acid, that's it was the name Barbit was given to this because it happened on that very particular day. Barbituric acid does not have a sedative or hypnotic effect, but its derivative diethyl barbituric acid, barbitol, does. It was marketed by Merck and Bayer as Veronal, diethyl barbituric acid, is a much more potent hypnotic sedative anticonvulsant agent than chlorhydrates. And guess what? More than 2,500 analogs of barbiturates were synthesized by 1950 and patented. They represented different classes. Phenobarbital luminal 1911 was most successful as a hypnotic. Eli Lilly, as usual, developed uh, jumped in to follow in this race with new medications and developed amobarbital, amital, and seconal in 1923 and 1929, consequently, respectively. And many others mostly used as sleep-inducing hypnotics. Phenobarbital proven effective in epilepsy, while thiopental is a first-line usage anesthetic. Barbiturates were also prescribed for certain psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia and for alcohol and morphine-related withdrawal symptoms, such as for delirium tremens and seizures that happen from alcohol withdrawal. They were also, listen to this, they were also given as sleep cures within a modality treatment called prolonged sleep therapies to psychotic patients. Or psychotic, I don't prefer this word, to like patients, schizophrenic patients or bipolar patients in psychotic phases or manic phases. So they give them these sleep cures, these hypnotic medication, barbiturates, for prolonged sleep. Is similar to when they give them a coma insulin. So they just stay, sleep it over, wake up better. And of course, the patient wakes up, doesn't bother anybody because they're in a coma or in sleep. And then they wake up still um, still fatigued and tired from the medication, but then it doesn't cure the disorder. The patient enters a state of sleep that might last days. These treatments were initially attempts to address resistant psychiatric conditions in 1920s and 1930s. But again, the intentions were good. They thought it was work. It's better than having them jump off of the roof. They have them sleep. In 1950s, have have been have revolutionized have been revolutionized by the birth of antipsychotics and other psychotropics. CII got news of this as customary. They got involved. They developed certain programs for brainwashing and loosening tongues to spill in secrets, such as with sodium pentothal, also known thiopental. They give them these medications and the patient just talks. But then again, what do you know? Which is truth or just hallucination? So CIA is also reported to have used barbiturate experiments on many subjects while in sleep-induced state to loosen their tongue. This could work. The patient is sleeping and then they use certain things, whatever experiment they have to have them talk or even suggest things to them. Barbiturates have become disseminated in society by the 1940s. 70 tons, imagine 70 tons of medication were produced in 1936. Um, 11 million people were prescribed barbiturates by 1955. Barbiturates also have very serious side effects that are similar to the the ones encountered with chloride right in the 19th century. They are addictive and dangerous to use as the therapeutic margin is very thin, similar to the other medication, chlorohydrate. So there's a very thin margin between what's therapeutic and what's lethal. I mean, you just exceed the dose minimally, and then you might get very lethal outcome. The vernal habit documented the addictive of the barbiturates only a year after its hit in the market. 1 year, when it has become sold, there was a phenomenon that's called the vernal habit, and that's to market as an addictive, very addictive substance. A conference on the regulation and distribution of barbiturates was held in Washington in 1945. 1952, the World Health Organization recommended that a barbiturate should be dispensed by prescription only. I mean, I remember, and I was not in 1950s. I was growing up in 70s and 80s, and people could go to the pharmacy and get sick on that with no prescription, nothing. That was in my country, in North Africa. By 1960, USA has known an exponential rise in barbiturate addiction. They were also used as street drugs, as goofballs, a mixture of barbiturate and amphetamine leading to an exponential rise in overdose incidents and death. Emil Fisher, ironically, and was among the ones that dosed on barbiturates and died. He lost his two sons and was depressed, and he was also diagnosed with cancer, and that's why it's said that he overdosed on barbiturates. Yet the only overdose that made the headlines and generated all kind of conspiracy controversies up till now was Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe, the Hollywood seduction star, who overdosed on barbiturates on August 28, 1962. If you remember, there were all these conspiracy theories about her involvement with the Kennedys and that why CIA killed her or something. So there were all kinds of rumors. Let me stick to what the author said. Bimigidi or Bimigide was the antidote, but there was an issue with its misuse. For example, a Dr. John Bodkin Adams was on trial for prescription abuse of barbiturates and antidote misuse. He gave them a lot of barbiturates, but the antidote he gave them just a 1 minute dose, a small dose, one dose to take, and that was not helpful. And this after his clients gifted him with very expensive gifts. People got addicted and felt good with those medication, and they went to him and gave him gifts, and he was accused of embezzlement, not to mention murder, because he gave them the medication and gave them just not enough dose as antidote. Barbiturates are still used in epilepsy treatment and in anesthesiology. The controversial misuse of barbiturate paved the way to benzodiazepine. And I'll stop here and talk to you about that later. And I'll close with this piece, Mozart's piece, Divertimento. Don't see any comments. Okay, let's talk about tranquilizers in minor key. The author is using this musical terms during all along this chapter. So prior to the birth of benzodiazepines, there came Milton, a drug that got its name from a town in New Jersey. Carter Wallace laboratories were in Brunswick, not far from Milton. Their focus was on liver pills, laxative pills. But as we have talked about in 1950s, medicine has known great progress. New medications, new therapies, or restriction on dispensing medications took effect, and many have become medications have become prescription meds only. That means the price has gone up, and again, all good for the pharmaceutical companies and the pharmacists. Unique profit profile patented drugs at high price have seen the light. Carter Wallace had to update its business for both profit and survival. They directed research effort towards finding new drugs. They recruited Doctor Fred Frankberger, a native Czech Jewish who fled from Nazism with his family to UK. He worked on the purification of penicillin while working uh, uh, for public health laboratories, Wakefield, Yorkshire. As he was testing substances as preservatives for penicillin, he tried mifenicin on mice. They became extremely relaxed while awake. He published his findings in 1946 and described mifenicin uh, as tranquilizing. Mifenicin or myonicin was soon sold in USA and UK as muscle relaxant for patients with EMS and similar disorders. So it relaxed them, but it did not knock them out. They did not sleep. They stayed awake. His research reputation landed him a job at Carter Wallace Laboratories once in USA. Rifenicin had a very narrow therapeutic index and could be lethal, just like with barbiturates and potassium bromide, and they have very thin margin between the therapeutic and the lethal effect. So, at Wallace Carter Laboratories, he synthesized together with another colleague, John Ludwig Bernon, he came up with meprobamate. Rifenicin is a muscle relaxant and was also considered for treatment in psychiatry since it relaxes muscles without the hypnotic effect. Meprobamate was tried both on patients with psychiatric disorders and neurologic disorders such as epilepsy. Although relaxing it did not produce antipsychotic effect, so they considered it anxiolytics. It passed the FDA requirements since Wade and a drug company offered to co-develop the products. It was eventually sold as Equanil by Wheat and Milton in reference to Milton, the idyllic canvas town that was nearby Carter Wallace Labs in New Jersey. So it was sold under two names. Milton hits Hollywood. Now it's all. Now this is the new medication, the anxiolytic medication, the anxiety medication, the disorder that affects only certain population. So anxiety was a new diagnosis. Carter Wallace were worried uh, about their new drug. It might not sell. It soon did, and it sold beyond their expectation. And the most in demand one, it became the most in demand. It became a fashionable accessory to Hollywood tastemakers, writers, painters, and the ones in high pressure trades. Milton sold also because the people's and the medical community's new way of seeing mental health. 1950s antipsychotics were developed. We know that by now. It's a fact. Penicillin, a life-saving medication, accidentally gave rise to mifenicin. While they were just treating it, trying to purify it, they used mifenicin and they found out it was relaxing, muscle relaxant, which in turn inspired the birth of meprobamate, which research to overcome its fatal drawback gave birth to Milton. So we have one gives birth to the other, gives birth to the other. So, and it's always kind of comes, it's haphazard and also research. Antibiotics armed the world against some fatal infections and plagues. Such change gave people hope and confidence they could defeat all kinds of diseases, mental disorders included. Before a patient become schizophrenic or have bipolar or quote unquote psychotic, and they don't get treated. They get almost like imprisoned, chained, and do not get treatment. But now, with all these medications available to them, that was available to them, treatment and people's perception of disorders have changed. It's not an affliction because you are evil, it's just a disorder. Now, psychiatry was becoming more confident in the ability to restore mental health through restoring physiological balance rather than psychoanalysis. Now, psychoanalysis started to fade for psychiatry. You no longer just go to Dr. Freud and then lay on a couch and then get some LSD and spill it, and then here you have a cathartic moment. It's different. Advertising was also very instrumental in convincing people and medical practitioners into buying. Hoffman LaRoche got news of Milton, Equanil, um, and wanted to be ahead with a better product. That is how Leo Sternbeck came to play. Now, Leo Sternbeck home run. Now we're using what is it, baseball analogy. So they could have used a chemically structurally variant of meprobamate that had not been patented yet. So they said, okay. Malari said, "Oh God, they got all these medications. We gotta catch up. Milton Equanil and wanted to be ahead. We also need to come up with something new to stay, on top of it." And the author said they could have gotten just another analog that has been found out but not patented. Um, caris, carisoprodol. Carisoprodol. Um, known as soma, and I don't know why it was known as soma. Remember the Vedic drink? They thought garlic mushroom might have been one of the main ingredients, psychedelic ingredients, and how they isolated its psychoactive elements, ibotonic acid, muscimol, and then said, okay, since it acts in the same way, it was the soma was described. It must be the what has been used. So no, this medication has that name, trade name. Wallace developed this drug among many other analogs of meprobamate. They also opted for starting a new research line for a different chemical that could have its own genuine profile. They wanted to start from scratch. Lewis Sternberg of Roche was assigned the responsibility to search for a minor tranquilizer. Now remember, you have the major tranquilizers, the ones that calm maniacal patients, and the minor tranquilizer, people for depression or for people with stress or anxiety. The author said both excellent science and serendipity were involved as usual. This is a quote from the author, and that's true. This is what's been happening since I've read this book from start to end. Most of the medications, they're looking for something, for starting up something, and they come up with another, and that's what they start using. They found out it's good for something, so better use it. So here, this is what's happening. It's also both the science and chance have been in interplay. Although a lot of actual serious scientific scholarly research was going on, accident played a major role in the development of the next med. Is this a new thing? It seems more of a pattern. Leo Sternberg unearthed a research project of his archived research that was aimed at finding a new synthetic dye. He has some research that he just put aside while he was looking for a synthetic dye. The compound he developed was hepto, benzoheptoxydiazine. That could be searched further, but at that time it did not yield any new dye or any medical or any substance of any medical or clinical significance in 1957. As they were cleaning up flasks, they were trying to find out new thing. They were cleaning up the laboratory and trying to look up to cook up something or look up something new. Because an old a colleague of Leo's, Rita, found a compound that had not been tested yet and decided to send it for testing. Here's this one. What is it? Let's send it for test. And then I was like, but they are in a lab, aren't they? So the reaction used produced a different compound, benzodiazepine, originally called metaminochlorodioxyposide. So tests on animals proved it to be an effective muscle relaxant and good at terminating seizures. Further tests on animals proved benzodiazepine is good at staving off aggressivity that results from certain brain lesions to the septal frontal area. Benzodiazepines also a large uh, a large gap. There is like oh yes, yes. There is a larger gap, a wider gap between the therapeutic and the lethal. So they were safer. That's what it means. Because all the other hypnotics and sedatives had a narrow therapeutic index. For this has a larger one, and trials on large population of human subjects proved to be equally effective. In 1960, it was approved by FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Chlordiazepoxide, Librium, was the first minor tranquilizer to be sold. Others followed, such as diazepam, Valium in 1963. Benzos still infatuated the whole world, including doctors, thanks to Russia's very aggressive professional campaign to quote the author Milton, had been the John Baptist of tranquilizers, a prophet for the new area. So it started that way. It just ushered the door and opened the door for new medication. It's almost like a prophet that's saying, "Hey, Christianity is coming," or something like that. Billions of benzodiazepines, mm, uh, diazepine prescriptions were filled by 1977, a worth of 8,000 tons were consumed by Americans. Roche and competitors produced countless new compounds and analogs of benzodiazepines for treatment of seizure, insomnia, anxiety, etc. Xanax and clonopine were not Roche's, but had also had similar success. Insights into their mechanism of action paved the way to the other medications, more selectivity and less side effects. Now we'll take a break, listen to some Divertimento, and then I'll talk about benzodiazepines receptors and the rest of the chat. It is very interesting, but as I said, it's a pattern. All medications, from the simplest ones to the more complex one. Okay, I probably should end it here. Okay, I think he'll end the chat here, the live stream, and then I'll continue talking about this chapter for next time. And please, if you're following, just pay attention to all the medications, how they work, the mechanism of their action, what receptors they affect. And each time they found out the medication has certain receptors that affinities with certain receptors and binds to certain receptors in the brain, they find out that there are substances in the body that acting similar. So just pay attention to that uh, because what's coming next is going to be even more interesting. I think it's interesting for research to be researched further and for studies, especially for people in the field. So now let me wish you a good night and see you next time. And I hope you're having a very cozy night and you're staying safe of the cold and it's very slippery out and there's lots of snow outside. Uh, I can't claim that I'll have that luxury because I'll have to go to work tonight and I'll be driving and I don't even know when I come back if I find my spot that I shoveled. I said like shoveling 4 hours. It was like almost 20 inches or 15 inches, 15 maybe 20. I'm not good at estimating, but it was really deep. I had to shovel all that in front of the house and around the car, and then I had to remove it from the middle of the road. But it's all good. Well, see you next time. Bye bye.